My sister Celeste was 17 when a Navy SEAL commander walked across a crowded memorial service just to salute her. What nobody knew was that for 3 straight days, she had been standing guard over our fallen brother's casket while grown men in uniform walked past her like she was invisible. Before we dive and tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I'm talking about the kind of invisible that burns. The kind where people look right through you because they've already decided you don't belong. Celeste stood there in our brother Diego's oversized marine dress blues, the jacket hanging loose on her small shoulders, while sergeants and corporals whispered behind their hands about the teenager playing dress-up at a military funeral. But here's what those Marines didn't know about my little sister. When Celeste makes up her mind about something, you might as well try to move a mountain with a spoon. She's always been the quiet one in our family, the artist while the rest of us talked tactics, the one who painted watercolors while Dad polished his combat boots. Everyone always assumed she was the soft Rivera, the one who couldn't handle the military life that ran through our blood like diesel fuel. Diego was our middle brother, 19 years old when an IED took him out in Afghanistan. Corporal Diego Rivera, they called him at the memorial service. But to Celeste, he was just Diego, the brother who taught her how to throw a curveball and sneak extra cookies from Mom's jar. The brother who promised her before his deployment that he'd come home safe, that he'd be there when she graduated high school. When Diego's body came home to Fort Braxton, someone needed to maintain honor guard beside his casket during the 3-day viewing. It's an old military tradition, showing respect, making sure a fallen soldier is never alone. Dad was too broken up to stand that long. Mom was drowning in funeral arrangements. I was dealing with the Marine liaisons and paperwork that comes with death in the military. Nobody asked Celeste to take that post. Nobody expected the 17-year-old girl to understand what honor guard meant or why it mattered. But at 6 in the morning on that first day, when the chapel doors opened, there she was, standing straight as a rifle barrel beside Diego's casket, wearing his dress blue jacket like armor, her chin up and eyes forward. The first visitors were respectful enough. Gold Star families understand grief comes in all shapes and sizes. But when Diego's unit started arriving, when the active-duty Marines began filing through to pay their respects, the whispers started. Who's the kid in the oversized jacket? Someone should tell her the honor guard handles this. Why is there a civilian standing post? By afternoon, it was clear that Celeste had become the elephant in the room. A 17-year-old girl maintaining military honor guard was apparently more than some people could wrap their heads around. One sergeant even approached her directly, asking if she needed help finding her parents, like she was some lost child who'd wandered into the wrong ceremony. That's when I knew we were heading for trouble, because I saw that look in Celeste's eyes, the same look she got when kids at school said she was too weird for the art crowd and too artsy for the military brats. The look that said she'd rather break than bend. What none of us realized was that over the next 2 days, my quiet little sister was about to teach a room full of Marines what dedication really looked like. And by day 3, when that Navy SEAL commander walked through those chapel doors, everything we thought we knew about strength and honor was about to change forever. To understand why what happened next was so shocking, you need to know who Celeste really was in our family. Growing up Rivera meant growing up military. Dad did 20 years in the Marines before retiring as a master sergeant. Our house looked like a recruiting poster with framed citations on the walls, polished boots lined up by the door, and dinner conversations that sounded more like tactical briefings than family time. Diego fit right into that world. Even as a kid, he'd march around the backyard in Dad's old uniform, calling cadence and saluting the flag every morning. When he enlisted straight out of high school, Dad couldn't have been prouder. Finally had a son who got it, who understood what service really meant. Then there was Celeste, 3 years younger than Diego, 5 years younger than me, and about as far from military material as you could imagine. While Diego was learning to field strip an M16, Celeste was in her room painting landscapes and writing poetry. While I was at ROTC meetings, she was in art class creating these incredible charcoal portraits that made you feel something deep in your chest. Dad tried, I'll give him credit for that. He'd drag Celeste to Marine Corps birthday balls and change of command ceremonies, hoping some of that warrior spirit would rub off on her. But she'd sit there in her dress looking uncomfortable, counting the minutes until she could go home and disappear into her sketchbook again. Dad's friends always treated Celeste like she was made of glass. "Oh, that's the artistic one," they'd say, ruffling her hair like she was still 5 years old. "She's got her mother's gentle spirit." What they really meant was that she wasn't tough enough for the military life, wasn't strong enough to handle the hard truths that came with serving your country. Even Mom fell into that trap sometimes. "Celeste is my sensitive child," she'd tell the other military wives. "She feels things too deeply for this life." Like being sensitive was some kind of weakness, like caring too much was a character flaw in a family of warriors. The truth is, Celeste did feel everything deeply. When Diego deployed to Afghanistan, she couldn't sleep for weeks. She'd sit up at night painting these dark, swirling canvases that looked like storms were trapped inside the frame. She worried about him constantly, checking the news obsessively, jumping every time the phone rang during the day because she knew that's when the notification officers made their calls. Fort Braxton Memorial Chapel sits right in the heart of the base, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and flag poles that never seem to stop flying at half-mast. It's where they hold the services for the ones who don't make it home, where families gather to say goodbye to sons and daughters who died wearing the uniform. When Diego's body came back from Afghanistan, the chapel became our second home. 3 days of viewing before the burial, military tradition that goes back generations. Someone needed to maintain honor guard beside the casket, standing watch so a fallen warrior was never alone. It's a sacred duty, usually handled by active duty personnel or veterans who understand the weight of that responsibility. But Dad couldn't do it. 20 years of Marine Corps steel, and losing Diego had broken something inside him that wasn't going to heal anytime soon. I found him crying in the garage that first morning, holding one of Diego's old football trophies like it might bring his boy back. Mom was juggling funeral directors and casualty assistance officers and the 1,000 details that come with military death. I was running interference with Diego's unit, trying to coordinate with the Marines who'd flown back from Afghanistan for the service. Nobody thought about Celeste. Nobody considered that the quiet girl with the paint-stained fingers might have her own ideas about how to honor her brother. When I arrived at the chapel that first morning, expecting to find it empty except for the funeral director, there she was, standing at perfect attention beside Diego's flag-draped casket, wearing his dress blue jacket over her simple black dress. The jacket was 3 sizes too big, hanging loose on her small frame, but somehow she made it work. Her back was straight, her chin up, her hands clasped behind her back in a modified position of attention. She looked like she'd been there for hours, and knowing Celeste, she probably had been. Standing guard over Diego, making sure he wasn't alone, fulfilling a duty that nobody had asked her to take but that she'd claimed as her own anyway. The trouble started small, the way these things always do. A few raised eyebrows when the first visitors arrived that morning and saw a teenage girl standing on her guard. Most of the Gold Star families were respectful enough. They understood that grief makes people do things that don't fit the normal rules, and they nodded politely at Celeste before moving on to pay their respects to Diego. But when the Marines started showing up, everything changed. These were Diego's brothers, the men who'd served with him in Afghanistan, who'd shared foxholes and MREs, and the kind of bond that only comes from keeping each other alive in a war zone. They came in their dress blues with chests full of ribbons, carrying themselves with that unmistakable military bearing that announces to the world that they've earned the right to be here. And they took one look at Celeste and decided she hadn't. The whispers started around noon. "Who's the kid in the oversized jacket?" I heard one corporal ask another. "Someone should tell her the honor guard handles this." They weren't trying to be cruel, not at first. They genuinely couldn't understand why a civilian teenager thought she belonged standing post beside a fallen Marine. By mid-afternoon, the questions became more direct. A staff sergeant approached Dad while he was signing papers with the funeral director. "Sir, with all due respect, your daughter doesn't need to be standing there. We have Marines who can handle the honor guard. It's not really appropriate for family members to maintain post. Dad looked over at Celeste, still standing straight as a rifle barrel beside Diego's casket, and I saw something break in his face. He was tired, grieving, and dealing with people questioning his family's choices wasn't high on his priority list. "Maybe he's right, sweetheart," Dad said gently when he approached Celeste. "These Marines knew Diego. They can take care of this." I watched my sister's jaw tighten, the same stubborn set I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. "Diego was my brother too," she said, her voice quiet but steel hard. "I'm not moving." That's when things started getting ugly. By the second day, word had spread through Diego's unit that the dead Marine's little sister was causing some kind of scene, refusing to let the proper honor guard do their job. More Marines showed up, partly to pay respects, but partly, I suspected, to see the spectacle for themselves. I overheard 2 lance corporals talking near the chapel entrance. "Look at the little girl playing soldier," one said with a smirk. "Cute that she thinks she's honor guard material." The other one laughed. "Someone should tell her this isn't dress-up time." Celeste heard every word. I saw her flinch, saw her hands tremble slightly before she locked them back into position behind her back. But she didn't move, didn't break position, didn't give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd gotten to her. Staff Sergeant Morrison, Diego's former squad leader, made it his personal mission to resolve what he saw as a breach of military protocol. He was a good man, I could see that, but he belonged to the old school that believed certain traditions were sacred and shouldn't be messed with by people who hadn't earned the right. "This is getting out of hand," he told me on the second afternoon. "Your sister's heart is in the right place, but she's embarrassing herself and disrespecting Diego's memory. Honor guard is a military tradition. She's not qualified." When I relayed Morrison's concerns to Celeste during a brief break, expecting her to finally see reason, she looked at me with eyes that reminded me exactly why Diego used to call her the fighter when we were kids. "I promised him I'd watch over him one more time," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion I could see in her face. "I'm not breaking that promise because some Marines can't handle a girl doing their job." By the third day, the situation had reached a breaking point. More people were coming to witness what some called Celeste's inspiring dedication, and others called her stubborn disrespect. The chapel was divided into camps, whispered arguments breaking out between those who admired her commitment and those who thought she was making a mockery of military tradition. Celeste had been standing for nearly 60 hours by then, surviving on determination and maybe 3 hours of sleep. Her face was pale, her legs visibly shaking, but she refused every offer to step aside. She'd planted herself beside Diego's casket like a tree that had grown there, impossible to move without destroying something fundamental in the process. By the morning of the third day, Celeste looked like a ghost wearing Diego's uniform. Her face had gone pale as winter, dark circles carved under her eyes like bruises, and I could see her legs trembling even when she locked her knees. She'd barely eaten in 3 days, surviving on sips of water and the kind of stubborn determination that can either break you or forge you into something unbreakable. Mom tried bringing her a sandwich around 10 that morning. "Sweetheart, you need to eat something," she whispered, pressing the food into Celeste's hands during a brief moment when the chapel was empty. Celeste took exactly 2 bites before handing it back. "Can't eat and stand guard at the same time," she said simply. "Diego never got to eat his last meal. I can handle missing a few." That's when I realized this had gone beyond grief and entered something else entirely. Celeste wasn't just standing guard over Diego's body anymore. She was making some kind of statement about honor and family and what it means to truly commit to something bigger than yourself. The problem was, nobody else seemed to understand what that statement was supposed to be. Staff Sergeant Morrison showed up again that afternoon, this time bringing backup. 2 other Marines from Diego's unit flanked him as he approached Celeste's position, their faces serious but not unkind. They'd clearly discussed this beforehand, developed what they thought was a reasonable solution to what they saw as an unreasonable problem. "Miss Rivera," Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in the Corps. "This has gone on long enough. You've made your point, whatever that point was supposed to be, but this is inappropriate. Honor guard is a military tradition with rules and protocols that exist for good reasons. You're not qualified to maintain this post." Celeste looked him straight in the eye, and for a moment I saw exactly what Diego must have seen in her when he called her the toughest Rivera kid despite being the smallest. "What qualifications do you need to love someone, Sergeant? What protocol covers watching over your brother one last time?" "That's not how this works," Morrison replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Military funerals have procedures. There's a right way and a wrong way to honor the dead, and standing here playing dress-up in your brother's uniform isn't the right way." The words hit Celeste like a physical blow. Playing dress-up. Like everything she'd endured for 3 days, all the whispers and stares and sleepless hours was just some kind of childish game. I saw her hands clench into fists behind her back, saw the muscle in her jaw twitch with the effort of staying controlled. "My brother didn't die for procedures, Sergeant," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the chapel like a bell. "He died for people, I'm people, and I'm staying right here until they put him in the ground tomorrow." Morrison looked to me then, clearly expecting backup from the reasonable family member. "Your sister is making a spectacle of herself and embarrassing your family. Talk some sense into her." But standing there watching Celeste face down 3 combat Marines without flinching, I realized something important. My little sister wasn't the soft Rivera anymore. Maybe she never had been. Maybe we'd all been so busy looking for toughness in the obvious places that we'd missed the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself with raised voices and clenched fists. "She's not embarrassing anyone," I heard myself say. "She's doing exactly what Diego would have done if the situation were reversed." By evening, word of Celeste's 3-day vigil had spread beyond Fort Braxton. Local news stations had caught wind of the story. Military blogs were picking it up, some calling her inspirational, others questioning whether she was disrespecting military tradition. The chapel had become a destination, people coming not just to pay respects to Diego, but to witness the teenage girl who'd refused to abandon her post. Some visitors brought Celeste flowers, others brought criticism. Military families were divided, some seeing her as a symbol of dedication, others viewing her as a misguided kid who didn't understand her place. But through it all, Celeste remained exactly where she'd planted herself 3 days earlier, standing guard over Diego with a determination that had transformed from grief into something approaching legend. As the sun set on the 3rd day, with just hours remaining before Diego's funeral, Celeste made her final choice. Despite everything that had been thrown at her, despite the exhaustion and the pressure and the voices telling her she didn't belong, she planted her feet wider, straightened Diego's jacket on her shoulders, and prepared to finish what she'd started. The black sedan pulled up to the chapel just as the evening viewing was winding down. Through the stained glass windows, I watched a figure in dress blues step out of the passenger side, and even from a distance, you could tell this wasn't just another Marine coming to pay respects. This person moved differently, carried himself with the kind of authority that makes rooms go quiet without him saying a single word. Commander Nathan Cross walked through those chapel doors like he owned every inch of ground between the entrance and Diego's casket. 15 years as a Navy SEAL had carved him into something that looked more like a weapon than a man. His chest was covered with ribbons that told stories most people couldn't imagine, and when he moved, everyone else in that chapel seemed to fade into the background. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. Staff Sergeant Morrison, who'd been holding court near the guest book with 2 other Marines, suddenly found himself standing at attention without consciously deciding to do so. Even the civilian families straightened up, sensing they were in the presence of someone who'd earned the right to command respect simply by walking into a room. Morrison approached Commander Cross with the confident stride of a man who assumed he'd found an ally. "Sir, thank you for coming. I need to brief you on a situation we've been dealing with. The deceased sister has been maintaining an unauthorized honor guard for 3 days now. She's not military, not qualified, and frankly, sir, it's becoming an embarrassment to the Corps." Commander Cross didn't even glance at Morrison. His eyes were locked on Celeste, who stood beside Diego's casket looking like she'd been carved from the same marble as the chapel walls. 3 days of standing guard had stripped away everything non-essential, leaving only the core of who she was. Exhausted, yes. Shaking from fatigue, absolutely. But unbroken in a way that made the word unbreakable seem inadequate. Cross walked past Morrison without acknowledging him, past the gathered Marines and military families, past everyone who'd spent 3 days debating whether Celeste belonged there. He stopped exactly 3 feet from where she stood, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, far enough away to show proper military respect. 3 days, he said, his voice carrying across the chapel like it had been designed for command. 72 hours, no relief rotation, no breaks longer than 5 minutes, no complaints that anyone's heard. Celeste's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of every hour she'd spent standing there. Yes, sir. Commander Cross studied her face for a long moment, taking in the exhaustion, the determination, the stubborn set of her jaw that said she'd rather collapse than step aside. When he spoke again, his words hit the chapel like thunder. Corporal Rivera was lucky to have a sister with this kind of dedication. Then Commander Cross did something that stunned every person in that room. He came to full military attention, his spine straight as a flagpole, his heels locked together with a sound that cracked like a gunshot. His right hand snapped to his forehead in the most perfect military salute I'd ever seen, held with the precision that only comes from years of honoring fallen warriors. "You've honored your brother," he said, holding that salute like it was the most important thing he'd ever done. "You've honored your family, and you've honored every service member in this room." The silence that followed felt sacred, like the moment between lightning and thunder when the whole world holds its breath. Then, one by one, every person in uniform in that chapel came to attention. Staff Sergeant Morrison, his face red with what I realized was shame, not anger. The 2 lance corporals who'd made jokes about Celeste playing dress-up. Marines I'd never seen before who'd come just to witness the spectacle. The sound of boots clicking together and hands snapping to foreheads filled the chapel like a symphony of respect. Even some of the civilian families stood straighter, recognizing they were witnessing something profound. Commander Cross held his salute for a full 10 seconds, an eternity in military time, before bringing his hand down with the same precision he'd raised it. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler but no less commanding. "Young lady, I've served with some of the toughest warriors this country has produced. What you've done here requires the kind of courage that can't be taught in any boot camp. Your brother would be proud." The chapel remained silent as Cross turned and walked back toward the entrance, but the atmosphere had completely transformed. The teenage girl in the oversized Marine jacket was no longer an embarrassment or a spectacle. She was exactly what she'd been all along, though it had taken a Navy SEAL commander to help everyone else see it. The transformation in that chapel was immediate and complete. After Commander Cross walked out, the Marines who'd spent 3 days questioning Celeste's right to be there suddenly couldn't approach her fast enough. Staff Sergeant Morrison was the first, his face a mix of shame and admiration as he stopped in front of my sister. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I understood what honor meant. Turns out a 17-year-old girl had to teach me." One by one, Diego's brothers-in-arms came forward. They shared stories about my brother, about his sense of humor in the foxholes, about how he'd talked about his little sister who painted pictures that could make you cry. They spoke to Celeste like she was one of them now, like she'd earned a place in their brotherhood through sheer force of will and love. The funeral the next day was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Commander Cross returned, as promised, carrying a perfectly fitted dress blue jacket that he'd somehow arranged to have tailored overnight. When the honor guard processed with Diego's casket, Celeste walked beside them, no longer the outsider trying to prove she belonged, but an integral part of the ceremony. Dad found me after the service, tears streaming down his face. 20 years in the Corps, he said, watching Celeste accept condolences from Marines twice her age. "I thought I'd taught your brother everything he needed to know about duty and honor, but Celeste knew it all along. She just showed it differently than the rest of us." Mom was equally transformed. The woman who'd spent years worrying that her sensitive daughter couldn't handle military life suddenly realized that Celeste hadn't been too soft for our world. She'd been exactly soft enough in all the ways that mattered most. Commander Cross approached our family before leaving that day. "Your daughter taught me something important," he told my parents. "Military tradition isn't about keeping people out. It's about recognizing excellence wherever it comes from. That 17-year-old girl showed more military bearing than some soldiers I've commanded." He handed Celeste a business card. "If you ever decide you want to serve your country in uniform, you call me. Any branch would be lucky to have someone with your dedication." But Celeste surprised everyone by shaking her head. "I'm not built for military life," she said with a small smile. "I'm built for taking care of people the military serves. There's a difference." 3 years later, that distinction became crystal clear. Celeste used the college money Diego had left her to start a nonprofit organization supporting military families dealing with loss. She called it Diego's Watch, and it became her life's work, helping families navigate grief while honoring their fallen warriors in their own unique ways. She kept Diego's dress blue jacket in her closet, perfectly preserved but never worn again. "That jacket served its purpose," she told me once. "It helped me stand when I didn't think I could, but I don't need it anymore." Every Memorial Day, Celeste returns to Fort Braxton Memorial Chapel. Not to stand guard this time, but to place fresh flowers on Diego's grave and remember the day she learned that strength doesn't always announce itself with loud voices and rigid traditions. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it wears paint-stained fingers, and sometimes it looks like a teenage girl refusing to abandon her post when the whole world tells her she doesn't belong. Commander Cross stayed in touch with our family over the years. He told me later that Celeste's 3-day vigil changed how he approached leadership, how he recognized courage in unexpected places, how he understood that the best warriors aren't always the ones who fit the traditional mold. The real lesson wasn't about military protocol or family grief or even sibling love, though all those things mattered. It was about the courage to define honor for yourself, to stand up for what you believe in even when everyone around you thinks you're wrong, and to trust that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to move. Diego died a hero in Afghanistan, but Celeste became one in a chapel in North Carolina, proving that heroism doesn't require a uniform or a battlefield. Sometimes it just requires a 17-year-old girl with enough love in her heart to stand guard over her brother for 3 straight days, no matter who thinks she doesn't belong there. That's the story of how my little sister taught a room full of Marines what dedication really looks like, and how a Navy SEAL commander's salute changed